Intense on the street, according to the head of Dublin City Council. The organisation's chief executive has criticised what he calls well-intentioned groups who give out tents and food, saying it's more likely to prolong the problem. He was responding to growing concerns about the number of antisocial behaviour incidents in the city centre. Owen Keegan told the Hard Shoulder here in Newstalk those living on the streets will be better served in supervised accommodation.
We've had up to 100, 150 beds available every night for homeless people, and we would have thought that it's not unreasonable that in those situations, if you're homeless, you'd go into a professionally managed hostel.
Healthcare workers who deal directly with COVID patients are 47 times more likely to catch the virus than those impacted by community transmission. That's according to healthcare unions who've written to the Taoiseach calling for the payment of financial bonuses to frontline workers to be speeded up. Meanwhile, an employer's body has strongly criticised reports the government's considering extra leave and non-taxable vouchers for work done by all public sector workers. Neil MacDonald, CEO of ISME, told the Hard Shoulder that it wouldn't be fair.
It would be an outrage if everyone in the public service was to get some sort of financial reward during a pandemic, when you look at the private sector and we still have 170,000 people out of work.
A further 1,558 COVID-19 cases have been confirmed. 262 people are in hospital with the virus, up 14 in the past 24 hours. 51 are in ICU, an increase of 3 over the same period. And finally, Tesla is under investigation after a series of crashes linked to flashing lights or hazard signs on emergency vehicles. Safety regulators say they're looking into the driver assistance system called Autopilot. That's it for now. More in an hour.
Newstalk weather.
Thanks to Ryanair. Extend your summer with a holiday to sunshine beaches in Spain, Italy, Portugal and Greece.
Some light rain over Ulster and North Connacht tonight, but mostly dry elsewhere. Lowest temperatures of 11 to 13 degrees. And now you're up to date on Newstalk.
The Newsround on Off the Ball.
With Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
This is Newstalk.
Yeah, you're welcome along. So Monday evenings Off the Ball, we've loads to get through. An extraordinary weekend of sport in many ways. 6 All-Irelands in a row, 45 championship matches unbeaten, leading by 6 at half-time as well, we should add. Dublin's run ended by, well, of course it had to be Mayo. Dara O'Kanaja and Mike Quirk both with us after 8 o'clock to make sense of an action-packed game and also where the Dubs are, where Mayo are, and of course Kerry Tyrone will go ahead, thankfully. Also, a very happy Meath camp. Emma Duggan, manager Eamon Murray on their semi-final win over Cork, plus the Premier League weekend, I think you'd have to agree, was more than decent right from Friday night. We have Pat Nevin, Kevin Kilban and Brian Kerr all on the way. 53106 the text number. We're at Off the Ball on Twitter. Richie McCormack, hello to you.
How are you, Joe?
And Dave McIntyre, come on in, hello.
Evening, lads. How are you?
Very well. Now, I do remember playing around the golf with you not so long ago, and you were saying, you know what, I'm okay with Dublin not winning the All-Ireland this year. I think it's getting a touch boring. So how did the reality feel?
Very similar to what I had predicted it might feel when we had that conversation, Joe. It was unusual. I was watching the game with a lot of my teammates in Raheny, and in the first half, when Dublin were in cruise control and they were 5 or 6 points up and they were playing that incredibly boring keep ball style of play, very systematic, very risk averse, nothing really in the game to catch your attention in the first half. I had a couple of quick looks around me during the ball being in play, and there was just idle chit-chat going on. There was not like an All-Ireland semi-final should feel. And then in the second half, when things obviously started to get on top of Dublin and Mayo really came into the game and felt there was something there for them, and they played some really brilliant stuff and took the game to Dublin, there was a sense of resignation and not a shrug of the shoulders, but this day had to come eventually. And Dublin fans of my generation will remember the dark days when there was 7 years without a Leinster title. I remember invading Croke Park pitch from Hill 16 when they won the 2002 Leinster final. It was an unbelievable achievement, it felt. And again, 3 years later, when Paddy Christie was the captain in 2005, or maybe I'm mixing him and Colin Goggins up at those 2 years, but we invaded the pitch in 2005 as well. It was an enormous achievement. It felt like the end of a drought. Younger Dublin fans just will have no idea really how that feels, given that they've won, 16 of the last 17 Leinster titles. But what happened on Saturday had to come eventually. And it was almost at times you felt like this was a Dublin team almost waiting to be beaten, that this heavy burden they've been carrying for so long of going unbeaten all the way back to that semi-final in 2014 was telling on them. And there's a few factors, I know we'll probably get into it. I know you, with your analysis on the show as the evening progresses, as to why it just got away from Dublin on Saturday.
Yeah. Curious what you think it is.
Well, there's a lot of things. I don't think in detail over the last 48 hours or so, and obviously discussing the game with a lot of people. The three things that stood out for me is that there's a real lack of competition in that Dublin team now. And it's something that was the opposite for so long. For so many years, we heard talk of the A versus B's games, and particularly when they were kind of marauding their way through Leinster, that their biggest tests before an All-Ireland semi-final, and in some years an All-Ireland final, was in those A versus B games. And I was just looking at the bench in 2017 when they beat Mayo in that unbelievable final. The bench was Comerford, Scully, Brogan, Davy Byrne, Diarmuid Connolly, Cormac Costello, Darren Daly, Paul Flynn, Eric Lowndes, Michael Darragh Macaulay, Kevin McManaman. Arguably the strongest bench in the history of GAA. Look at it on Saturday, absolutely nothing in comparison. So one factor is the bench is nowhere near as strong as it used to be. So your game changers are not there in the manner in which they used to be. But then that feeds into the other major factor, the lack of competition that is now in that team. I mean, do you think that Brian Fenton looks over his shoulder wondering, will he lose his place if he has a bad game? Under Jim Gavin, from certainly 2014 onwards, even the best players in that team, a bad game and you're likely to be looking over your shoulder, if not spending the first 40-odd minutes on the bench in the following game. And then the third major factor is I felt in the last 20 minutes of normal time in particular, when Mayo got on top of them, the flame had gone out, Joe. I just felt that ravenous hunger that we've seen in this group of Dublin footballers to win at all costs for so long just seemed to have died a little. And Mayo sensed that. They sensed it was there for them. And eventually, the dying of the light reaches every team. It's not because they're over the hill in the manner of maybe Kerry were in 87, having won the three in a row in 84, 85 and 86, because I think there's more legs in this team than maybe there was in that Kerry team in 87. But in their hearts and minds, I think the flame had died an awful lot. And against this really hungry Mayo team that has been injected with so much youth, I just think it got on top of them on Saturday. And when it came to turning things around, they couldn't manage to do so. Their playing style is a major issue as well. They haven't been able to get out of this straitjacket they've been playing in for a couple of years. You remember they were a point down heading into injury time against Kerry in the drawn game in 2019, and they sewed it into Kerry. They moved Stephen Cluxton into the full back line. They moved everybody one man up, and they basically hunted like dogs to get the ball back in order to set up Dean Rock for that equalising score. There was none of that on Saturday.
Yeah, I think
they didn't seem to be able to break out of that.
Slightly less adventurous outfit now, you know. They're trying to almost deaden a game and control a game. And at certain points when a game's in a melting pot, there's no controlling it. You have to just rise to it. And Mayo grew in energy. And, you know, I suppose that point might be exemplified by even the concession at the 45 in the closing minutes.
Completely,
like you can't fall over the line that way. And that wouldn't be the Dublin way of previous years. Richie, it was the wonderfully kind of epic, visceral occasion as well. Like, it was this deeply felt encounter on the pitch in the stands. A wonderful Pádraig O'Meara interview afterwards as well. Great scenes, you know, great day for Mayo. And I guess we've been waiting for a match like this for the entire championship.
Yeah, I can't remember who made the point on the show last week, but it definitely felt like the championship was beginning this weekend, and unfortunately we're going to have to wait for the second semi-final. But save for another competitive Ulster Championship, which turned out Tyrone, everything else has been a complete non-issue up until Saturday. And
I was saying that on Thursday. With the greatest respect to those Ulster games, where ultimately, and I said O'Meara instead of O'Hora there, but with the greatest of respect to those Ulster games, which are great in their own right. I mean, in terms of like what they mean for the bigger picture, a bit like Dave, who, by the way, casually mentioned his Raheny teammates there. I mean, he just wants to. Dave's back playing football, everyone. Okay, that was nice, Dave. I like it. You've got teammates again. But aside from those Ulster games, in terms of like Rich, and sorry to interrupt you there, but like clearing of the calendar, I was saying, and talking to people who are clearing the calendar, it was sort of the first day of the championship.
Yeah, and that's why I think a lot of people felt left down by that first half. I mean, I mentioned it as well at half time that Mayo seemed to have turned up completely bankrupt of ideas, particularly in the first half, because Dublin, I'm not going to say they were laying it on a plate for them, but there was certainly the sense that they were gettable, and it proved to be the case ultimately. But there was that sense going into the match. There was that sense in the first few minutes. And Mayo, They didn't have the ability to defend properly in that first half. They couldn't create chances properly. They definitely couldn't finish them when they did manage to create them. So for them to turn that around and turn it into this visceral, fist-pumping, absolutely the entire country is engaged in this second half and an extra time, turned out to be quite something. And there are certain players that deserve highlighting. O'Hora is definitely one of them. Lee Keegan had one of the most incredible games of football I think anybody's ever had in Croke Park. He was everywhere on Saturday evening. He was just immense. And then Conroy as well, Tommy Conroy in the forward line was spectacular, absolutely and one of those players, because Mayo in the absence of Cillian O'Connor and then with Aidan O'Shea having the game that he did, you wanted a forward to grab it by the scruff of the neck and to take their chances, to create a little bit, to burst through the lines of defence. And Conroy did exactly that. And that's, I think, what will give Mayo most hope for a final, is that they've showed that in the absence of their quote-unquote star names, that there are others that can definitely step up to the mark. But like Dublin left the door open for them in that second half. Dave mentioning that the flame had gone was absolutely spot on. I mean, it reminded me of those dark days of Dublin football whereby, on paper, they probably have one of the most talented bunch of players in the country. But in practice, like I remember the dark days of the late 80s and early 90s, whereby Dublin players were more known for their nastiness and their kind of snidiness on the pitch than they were for their actual results. And that's what was kind of borne out in the challenges of John Small and the challenges of James McCarthy. They just weren't at it. They weren't the same team. And that's going to be the most difficult thing to get back. It's not necessarily the results, or it's not necessarily the parading through Leinster. It's re-energising that hunger, rebuilding that hunger within a team is one of the most difficult things any manager can try and do.
Yeah, I guess the option he will have is a multitude to pick from. Like the way James Horan has avoided all talk of transition here is just so impressive. And that was maybe, by the way, Horan's finest hour on the sideline. Like you mentioned Cillian O'Connor there, Rich. I mean, Aidan O'Shea taken off as well on 48 minutes. Went to the bench first with Hessian on 27 minutes. I mean, these were amazing changes. And obviously whatever they communicated at half-time was done really calmly and effectively because the team responded. I mentioned Pádraig O'Hora's beautiful interview there, in tears, talking about how, I think he said these are the best days of my life, but whatever way it's been misheard, that's been elevated to just, this is the best day of my life. Anyway, we won't quibble over that. But in a quite a ballsy way, he said at the end of the interview, he was like, we turned them over just like we planned we would. And I just thought, like, this is Dublin you're talking about. We turned them over, just like we said. There was a steeliness about this. And then, of course, I remembered Pádraig O'Hora has serious form here. So cast your minds back a couple of years now. He's a mere Ballina Stephenites player. And they've got a big game in the championship. And it sounds like it's Mike Finnerty of the Mayo News interviewing him here. And you can just hear the absolute shock and the pause in Mike's voice when he's expecting
all or nothing when you play
the usual kind of stock answer from Pádraig, and what he gets is brutal truth.
All or nothing when you play Knockmore in a couple of weeks, but anytime Ballina play Knockmore over the years, it's a right good battle. Are you dying to test yourselves against them?
Yeah, we'll go and beat them in 2 weeks.
I love it. Any particular reason?
No.
Just because?
Just because.
This man needs to be interviewed every week.
Good value.
I assume they did beat them 2 weeks later, did they?
That's a good point. It'd be hilarious if they didn't.
What year? That was 2019, was it?
I don't know. Yeah, it feels about 2 years ago. Yeah, I do remember it at the time, but I wasn't too familiar with Pádraig O'Hora then. So there we are. One last one, Dave. We had Peter Caffrey on yesterday, and aside from an interesting perspective on the small McLaughlin incident, he also felt that standards have slipped behind the scenes in the Dublin camp. So do you sense that as well, something slightly looser under this tenure?
I'm not sure. You'd really need to be within the Dublin camp and maybe speak to a couple of senior players to get a view on that. When there is talk that there was differing opinions in the manner in which the whole Inishfeld's training session and COVID training was handled, and that I'm not going to say there was a split because I just don't know enough information about the situation to be able to call it that way. But there are certainly rumours circulating that there were some parties within the squad that were really upset by the fact that Dublin were training at all. And then there are others that were maybe part of those lads who were training would have a different view on it. But look, I'll go back to some of the factors I mentioned earlier. And I do think that even maybe going back to the end of the Jim Gavin reign, there was somewhat of a sense that there was a shackles put on this Dublin team in the manner in which they were playing the game, and it took somebody to really go after them. And Kerry did it at times in the 2019 drawn game, and Mayo did it in the second half on Saturday. But the other thing is, you know, I know you've Mayo roots yourself, Joe, and there's the sheer magnitude of the Mayo diaspora across the world is just astonishing. But we've been talking about this game now for about 10 minutes, and we barely mentioned Mayo. Obviously, you've mentioned Pádraig O'Hora, you've mentioned James Horan's form on the sideline. But it is Mayo that won this game, and it is Mayo that have gone into the All-Ireland final. And Mayo have been here before, many, many times. They beat Dublin in 2012. They were the reigning All-Ireland champions then, not been referred to as the greatest team of all time at that juncture, obviously. But they've never got the job done when they've got to this point. And yesterday's defeat of Dublin, on Saturday's defeat of Dublin, look, you took the crown off them for a couple of weeks, but will it mean anything at all who they've beaten in the semi-final if they lose to either Kerry or Tyrone?
No.
And the manner in which they played on Saturday, if it's Tyrone, possibly enough to beat them if they come up with the same game plan and the same fire in the second half. Their forward scored 2 points in play in the 70 minutes. Is that going to be Kerry any day of the week? It really isn't. And Mayo need to do whatever they can, and obviously James Horan will leave no stone unturned, to make sure that it's just not another year where they've reached the final and they end up the bridesmaids yet again, because they've been there too often and they've never managed to get over the line. And this will still be a failure, even beating the greatest team of all time in the eyes of a lot of people, if they lose an All-Ireland final in 3 weeks.
True. So Pat Nevin's going to join us this hour. We'll get back into the GA at 8. Kevin Kilban with us after 9. We'll also hear from Brian Kerr after 9 as well. The Newsround brought to you by Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Rich, we've a lot to get through. The Liam Sheedy news came through this morning.
Yeah, he has no doubt that Tipperary's hurlers will continue to do well despite his departure. The two-time All-Ireland winning manager has brought to an end his second spell in charge of the Premier Counties hurlers. Sheedy guided Tip to All-Ireland success in 2019, adding to his win during his original reign in 2010. And Liam Cahill is the favourite to take up the reins in Tipperary. He's come to the end of a 2-year term in charge of Waterford, having previously led Tip to All-Ireland success at minor and under-20 age grades. It's a potential appointment that was put to former Tip hurler Paddy Stapleton on this morning's OTB AM.
The only one I'm hearing is Darragh Egan,
right,
who's involved at the minute with Tipperary. What I'd say is Tipperary probably need just a little alteration in the way they're going about things. I think Tipperary look like they're playing the same hurling that they did maybe in 16, and maybe if you go back into 14, I was still playing at that stage where we play a lot of sort of angled balls from long distances into our forward line, into Shane McCannon, which is fine. But I think the windows of getting that, what we've talked about before, the windows to hit the ball into your full forward line are getting so small now that I think the ball needs to be worked up a little bit more up the field, and then you can hit a fast ball into a full forward. I suppose if you looked at Liam Cahill, he plays a lot of that hurling. He plays that style. Mikey Beavens is the coach, and they run that ball very, very hard. And they did when they were over Tip minors and under 20s as well. So that looks like the game plan. That's the modern age. I would, I'd be as happy as anyone to see Liam Cahill take it. But alternatively, if it was the likes of Darragh Egan, I think they'd be very well set too, because he has a huge hurling brain. But apart from that, I can't see anybody else that would be in line. Aaron O'Kelly, who's involved at the minute as well. For a bit of continuity, I can't see anybody else. And I've racked my brain, so I'd say it'd be any of the pick of one of those.
Paddy Stapleton speaking this morning. Owen McLaughlin's had surgery.
Yeah, on his double fracture to his jaw. The wing-back sustained the injury in a challenge from Dublin's John Small during Saturday's All-Ireland semi-final. Meanwhile, the All-Ireland final itself is now penciled in for September 11th. The GEA have relented and moved Tyrone's semi-final back a further week to August 28th. More than half of the Tyrone panel have contracted COVID-19.
Dave, the McLaughlin-Small incident, I mean, it's fairly obvious John Small knew he could line him up and dunt him with his shoulder, and that's a great part of the game in some ways. But if you miss time it and catch a fella in the head and certainly, break his jaw, but regardless of whether it's a broken jaw or not, then it's a red. You can't catch someone in the head with your shoulder, especially with that kind of force. If he whacks him shoulder to shoulder, beautiful. I mean, we all enjoy that kind of a hit.
Yeah, look, it's terribly unfortunate. I mean, do you argue these cases as a result of consequence or as a result of the context of the tackle? It is a red card irrespective of that, but is the tackle necessarily worse because of the really terrible injury that he suffered? It's a red card no matter what. The referee, I don't know how much of a view either he or his assistants got of it. If they got a full view of it, they've got it completely wrong. And it's a straight red every time. John Small has a pretty checkered history in terms of the amount of red cards that he's received in his Dublin career, famously getting sent off in back-to-back All-Ireland finals. But there's certainly nowhere that John Swall would have gone in to hurt him as he did and to leave him as injured as he did. We see it all the time. You're sitting in the commentary box or the press box or in the stands, and you can see the tackle 4 or 5 seconds happening before it actually takes place. You can see someone getting lined up, turning blindly into a tackle, and unfortunately, he's been left in a really bad way. And the referee got that one wrong. It's an absolute red card, stonewall. There's no way to argue against it. And it's just so unfortunate for him that he's going to miss an All-Ireland final because of it.
It sure is. You used the right phrase there, turning blindly, and that's why all the responsibility is on the aggressor. So not so long ago, Richie, the FAI came out and had a statement, or in a press conference rather, to explain just how screwed financially they were. Barcelona decided to follow suit today.
Yeah, Barcelona president Joan Laporta today revealing the perilous state of the club's finances. Their debt now stands at €1.35 billion, with the club having a negative net worth of 451 million. Gerard Piqué has already taken a pay cut in order for the club to register their summer signings like Sergio Aguero and Eric Garcia. And Laporta said today that further players will be approached to do the same as Piqué.
Yeah. The Paralympics, meanwhile?
Yeah, in Tokyo, they're going to be held largely without spectators, although some school children will be allowed to attend the games. Organisers say the event, which begins on the 24th of August, must be behind closed doors yet again due to the city's ongoing struggle with coronavirus. Pupils may be able to go at the request of local authorities as long as appropriate COVID-19 measures have been put in place. And while Meath booked an All-Ireland football final date with Dublin yesterday in the most dramatic of fashions, the Royals beat Cork 2-12 to 2-10 after extra time in their semi-final at Croke Park. Meath had trailed by 7 points with 2 minutes of normal time remaining before Stacey Grimes and Emma Duggan goals helped force extra time. Even captain Shauna Ennis told LMFM that she'd feared the worst.
Oh yeah, look, in fairness, it did look bad, and I suppose what we did then was we pressed about 12 for their kick out, so we had to go at it at that stage. We had to sort of throw caution to the wind, so we pressed up very high on their kick out. We knew if we could turn their kick out over that we could get something off it, so luckily enough it worked out for us.
So it's Dublin in the final. I know Mick Bowen's going to be on with the lads tomorrow morning on OTB AM. This evening we'll chat to Meath's Emma Duggan and the Meath manager Eamon Murray. An extraordinary turnaround in Meath fortunes over the last 5-6 years. Their first year back at senior level into an All-Ireland final. So that's an amazing story there. A little glimpse of what could be done, around the country in various counties when you get your act together. Meanwhile, there were great scenes as well for Offaly between Shane Larry in the stands, Michael Dignan down the pitch, and obviously the under-20 team going ballistic.
Yeah, it was a brilliant day all round yesterday, Croker, has to be said. Offaly sealing their first All-Ireland under-21 or under-20 indeed football title in 33 years. They beat Roscommon 114 to 111 in a thrilling conclusion to the Air Grid under-20 football championship. Joint captain Kieran Dolan spoke to Midlands afterwards, hoping it's just the beginning for this group of players.
Well, it just makes me feel like we can use this as a stepping stone. We've so many lads here that could go on and play senior for Offaly. So going forward, try and use it as a stepping stone and try win a Leinster or something with Offaly seniors in the next 10 years, 5 years. Be definitely a target for us. There's definitely a bit of a buzz about Offaly at the moment, Dave.
Yeah, in both codes, isn't there? I mean, their senior hurlers have done really well. They've got promoted back up to Division 1B of the Alliance Hurling League. They've won the Christie Ring Cup, so they're going to be back in at Joe McDonagh level next year. I don't think the hurlers lost a match in 2021 now that I think of it. And obviously that achievement of the 20 footballers backing up what the senior footballers have managed to achieve under John Maughan this year, with a good league and championship under him. He's very close to being reappointed for another season. And yeah, there's a real feel-good factor. I don't know how coincidental it is, and it's suddenly a little bit of Shane Lowry magic sparkle has been injected into the whole system, that suddenly they're starting to win trophies again and they're starting to climb the rows in both codes again. But there's a real sense that maybe just the tide is starting to shift a little. We have seen some of the developing counties now starting to win things. Dublin have been beaten by Meath and Offaly at underage level in the last month alone. We've seen Down come through, Ulster at 20s, Roscommon obviously getting to an All-Ireland final. And just a sense that maybe finally some of the lesser counties are starting to get their house in order. You just mentioned how the Meath ladies team have done exactly that in the last 4 or 5 years and made unbelievable strides coming through the grades. That these counties are maybe doing something similar. And you have to start at the very bottom. You have to work your way up. And in Offaly, they're certainly starting to see the seeds of that. You would hope that it isn't just a case of this incredibly gifted bunch of players, maybe similar to the hurlers that won those 2 All-Irelands in 94, 98, coming together at the right time, and that once they step away, that you will see very little coming in behind it. I really hope that isn't the case, and that there's real building blocks in place with this. It won't be just a bit of a fluke year, that it'll be repeated to some extent in years to come.
Premier League opening weekend, Rich?
Yeah, the Premier League has recorded its highest number of positive coronavirus results since January. Between the 9th and the 15th of this month, 11 new cases were confirmed over 2 rounds of testing. Their identities, of course, have not been revealed, and 9 of those were reported just last week.
We'll talk to Pat Nevin this hour. Kevin Kilban on the way after 9, Brian Kerr as well. Dave, I don't know what games you caught over the weekend. I thought it was a great opening weekend for various reasons. The Brentford-Arsenal game kicked things off in a certain feel-good fashion. The Brentford Community Stadium, I mean, it was just too romantic to take. It'll be the Qatar Airways Stadium in about 3 years' time. But and then United-Leeds was a good game at Old Trafford. And then yesterday, Spurs beating Manchester City. All told, there was a lot of interesting stuff across the weekend, and referees letting a lot of fouls go as well. Well, what would have been fouls in the last 2 or 3 years definitely helped the spectacle as well.
Absolutely, and VAR was conspicuous by its absence as well to a certain extent in a lot of the games. I don't know why the weekend fell in the manner in which it did, but I managed to gorge myself on sports. I watched Dublin Mayo, obviously, both of the ladies' football semi-finals, the under-20 football final, Friday night's Premier League game. I saw the United game, I saw Chelsea Palace, I saw Liverpool Norwich, and I managed to see Tottenham City yesterday. And I also managed to watch I managed to watch that 6-man playoff of the Wyndham Championship as well. So it was an incredible weekend. But the fact that we didn't have a single draw out of the 10 fixtures, and all bar 3 of the games went the way of the home team. Now, is that coincidental, or is it the fact that these stadiums are full again and teams are being a little more attacking oriented and going after the opposition a little more than they were maybe when obviously the general equation of home versus away swung completely behind when the games were behind closed doors. But if this weekend just gone as important to what's to come for the upcoming Premier League season, it's not to be missed. And just Tottenham beating City at home that, maybe every single game involving the so-called Big Four isn't a foregone conclusion.
God, that is quite the weekend. I mean, aside from, shuttle runs with your Raheny teammates, what else would you have had time for?
Not an awful lot else, to be honest. Bringing the young fella to a soccer match, and that was about it. There was nothing else to be done apart from watching sports. So I do. There's a couple of times I took a double take over the 3 nights and just thought, this really happening? Waiting for something to happen. I had to go and do something else. But I can't see it being repeated overly regularly. But I certainly enjoyed it while it lasted.
Good man, fellas. We're out of time. Richie, I'll be talking to you tomorrow. Cheers.
Thanks, lads.
Dave McIntyre, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
We have Pat Nevin up next.
The Newsround on Off the Ball.
With Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
The famous Holland & Barrett 1 cent sale is back, with buy one get one for just 1 cent.